You are listening to Sean Harrison on Amp Life Talk Radio, a place for amputees and those dealing with limb loss. The views expressed on the show by the host, co-hosts, and guests are their own. Always seek medical advice from a licensed medical professional.
Well, hello. Sorry for that long delay there. Of course, something crashes or doesn't start. So you just have me looking at you. So I had to reset it, and I'm recording offline. So if you are trying to listen live, I'm hoping that you hear me. But right now, I had to go offline and get everything started. So that way I don't have to go back in and do too much. So if you are listening to the show, you probably hear me. But over on Spreaker, I'm not live. Unfortunately, I couldn't queue back up all that information into my opening episode. So I just had to hit record offline so that my computer could catch up with me. Unfortunately, digital technology doesn't work the way you want it to work every single time you push a button. So you got to sit there and watch me just look at my stuff not playing and figure it out. How am I going to do this? So I want to say, first, welcome, everyone. I want to say, welcome back. It's been a long time, man. I was busy. We ended up in Las Vegas with the Ed Fair for my new company that I work with, Hanger Prosthetics. We had a lot of classes. We had snow in Las Vegas. We had all kinds of stuff going on in Las Vegas. And then when I got back from there, instantly jumped into work and clinics and meetings and all of that good stuff. Monique, we're good now. We got some sound. And then I got caught up in Sacramento late last Wednesday and was trying to get home, but I couldn't get home. So I had my backup production studio assistant post on Facebook that basically I was in traffic. There's no way I was going to make it home. I am glad to be back. We had a really good show lined up for that show, and that's the show I'm going to do tonight. Those of you that actually follow the show and listen to the show will know that we actually did a show live from Las Vegas at the Ed Fair with two awesome people, Peter and Caitlin, who are two awesome individuals that took the time out to get up very, very early in the morning with me and find a quiet spot. We had our coffee and we did a podcast actually from the Ed Fair. So that worked out. Got you some interesting people on the show other than me. But during that show, what ended up happening, as I met these two and we talked over several days, they gave me the idea about tonight's show because we kind of talked about what it was like to be an amputee. One of them was a congenital amputee. She was born like that, and one had something happen. So I thought of this show tonight, Labels and Expectations. So I wanted to talk about that because I think that's a very important topic. Hi, Tamara. So tonight, what we're going to be talking about is labels and expectations. And what does that mean? I know you guys are probably looking at that and trying to figure out, what is this guy talking about? What is he bringing up now? Well, labels, we all know that in our society, people use labels. And unfortunately, when you use labels, unfair expectations get applied to that also. That's kind of what we're going to be hitting on tonight. So again, hopefully you will enjoy this show. Hopefully it will reach out to you. I want to stir up some thought in you with this show tonight. So it's going to be a really interesting show. I got some really good information from the research that I had to look up on this topic. And let me tell you, This is probably one of the hardest shows that I had to work on finding information on this topic. And you would think there would be a lot of information out there, but there was very, very few. I had to cross-reference a lot of stuff. So let's do these introductions and let's kind of get into the show. Welcome, everyone. Those of you that are new and old listeners to the show, welcome to a talk show for amputees by an amputee dealing with limb loss and the topics and issues that affect us. If you're an amputee, the biggest thing I want you to know is that you're not alone on this journey and this path. Amp Life Talk Radio, and we're all about empowering amputees to reach their full potential through communication, education, and inspiration. So the other day, we were shopping. And if you know my lady, we shop a lot. So we were shopping the other day, and I saw this wine glass that I wanted. I'm a coffee mug connoisseur, and I love, a good whiskey glass or a wine glass. So we were shopping, and I saw this glass. And if you've been out and you've been shopping, you see something fancy and you want to get it, especially a cup or something. So I checked it out. The price was right. I figured, why not? I bought it. This was a very nice glass, very elegant, I could just see myself pouring a nice glass of red wine and having a sip. Well, we got home. I took the glass out because I'm all like a little kid, get out. I'm all excited to break it, and, cresting the ship. So I get the glass out, and right as I got the glass out and was admiring it, I noticed something. There was a label on it. A label stuck right to the side of it. Out of all places to put a label right on the side of it. So I gently tried to maneuver the label off with no luck. I was scraping at it, scratching at it, trying to get around the edges, and I have no fingernails, so that was not working too well. Hoping to just catch it at the right angle and pull it off in all one final, just one big piece. But it never works out like that. It tears, it rips, breaks off, and you end up spending hours, 45 minutes I spent picking at that label. I was only able to chip away at it little pieces at a time. One by one, they came off. It was so frustrating when you only want to just use something. Finally, I managed to get all of it off. I tried everything and anything. Finally got this label off. And when I did, I went and got me a nice a bottle of wine, poured some wine in there. And I was sitting on the couch, and I had the remote, and I was in my man space, and I was ready to indulge in a nice glass of red wine. I looked down at my new purchase, and as I glared at it, looking at it, thinking this is so awesome, I noticed something. I noticed that the sunlight streaming in hit the glass just right. And in spite of all my hard work and effort to get that label off, I could still see the outline of the sticky residue on my glass. We inhabit a world in which we tend to put labels on each other. These labels can be hard to remove, much like the one on my new wine glass. Some of these labels are damaging and have lifelong effects on the people with limb loss in a negative way. Tonight, I want to talk about labels and expectations. in segment one of tonight's show. It's titled, To Label or Not to Label. As you could tell from my opener, labels can be something that are not so nice. They tend to stick around. They tend to not go away, even when we think we've gotten rid of them. In psychology, the labeling theory is the theory of how people self-identify. And the behaviors of individuals sometimes are determined or influenced by the terms used to describe or classify them. This is how a psychologist, or in psychology, they describe labeling. It is associated with the concepts of self-fulfilling prophecy and stereotyping. Labeling, the theory of labeling, holds that deviance is not inherent in an act, but instead focuses on the tendencies of the majorities to negatively label the minorities, or those seen as deviants from the standard of cultural norms. If you're dealing with some type of disability or limb loss, labeling can be a very cruel thing. As I researched on this topic to come up with, one, the proper definition of labeling theory, which goes back to criminal behavior and how people labeled certain people back in the day that didn't follow the cultural norm. Labeling theory states that people come to identify and behave in ways that reflect how others label them. I hope you caught that. Labeling theory states that people come to identify and behave in ways that reflect how others label them. It is most commonly associated with the sociology of crime and deviance. Labeling and treating someone as a criminally deviant individual, these things can foster a deviant behavior. Labeling someone as a criminal, for example, can cause others to treat them more negatively. And the response to being treated more negatively can be in turn for the person to act more negatively or negative. As a society responds to the individual as a deviant, or let's replace that word, as an amputee or disabled or handicapped individual, the individual's self-image begins to reflect the imposed label. This is why we're talking about this topic tonight. When I was at Ed Fair and when I met with Caitlin and Peter, we talked about this. 3 amputees, 1 congenital, 2 of us traumas. We talked about labeling and how it made us feel, and was it okay? Was it cool? Are we okay with it? Are we not okay with it? And the results of labeling. What I just read to you is the professional definition of labeling. And as I read this and related it to how it applies to those of us with missing limbs, amputees, it is easy to see how being labeled, some of the terms we hear, and we've all heard them, from able-bodied people or able-bodied folks, can affect amputees in a very negative way and possibly force a negative response. Some of you probably have not given this much thought. You probably haven't even thought about it. you're probably a brand new amputee. You've probably been an amputee for 20, 30 years. Probably haven't thought about this. But this topic is very important for us to at least address, think about, or even to just ponder and discuss with another amputee or family. Because we know we've all heard the labels, the terms. Sometimes they come from friends, family, strangers. It happens. The two terms or labels most commonly used to describe a person who has, let's say, a limitation are handicapped and disabled. Let's look into that. Let's delve into those two terms, those two words. These are the politically correct ones that people use. And God knows in this day and age, you need to be politically correct. But these are the ones that are PC safe to use in open crowds in public while you're in front of someone. Well, we all know, we have heard of the other terms that are not so PC. Let's look at these terms a bit closer. Disability and handicap. What do they mean? Do you even know what they mean? Do you know what the term disability means when it is applied to an individual? Do you know what handicap means when you're referring to someone? So let's think about that. We're talking about, of course, amputees, us, individuals with limb loss. So if someone was to say or refer to you as, a disabled person, a handicapped person, what does that truly mean? We're amputees. We've got a limb loss, a limb difference. Well, a disability is the result of a medically definable condition that limits a person's movement, senses, or activities. So, are you disabled? Do you suffer from a disability? Let's look at handicap. Handicap is a barrier or circumstances that makes progress or success difficult, such as an impossible flight of stairs or a negative attitude towards a person who has a disability. I know your mind is working now. The wheels are spinning. So when we look at these two terms, think about it. Does it truly define you? Does it truly describe you? Is this your label you want to have? Are you okay with this label? Have you thought much about it? Well, let's continue on. I want to say, the next time you're asked a question or someone presents you as such, disabled, disability, handicap, how do you feel? Or would you, now feel free to share this information, to educate. But the question remains, to label or not? How else do we, or do able-bodied people describe one of us? How do able-bodied people describe someone with limb loss, limb difference? How do they do it? What have they been taught? What do you prefer? That's what I want to ask you to think about tonight. What do you prefer to be called, termed, labeled? What's right? What makes you feel okay? When people label us, they are judging us unfairly based on appearance, rather than getting to know who we really are. Labels sometimes have incorrect expectations. Once a person with limb loss are labeled, once you are an individual dealing with limb loss, once someone terms you or labels you, you are going to have that extra baggage that comes with that label. And that may be a big burden, very heavy to carry. The very term, the term disability suggests a deficit. I lost a foot. What deficit do I have? What deficit am I suffering from? I lost a foot. To me, it's like losing a shoe. I have a foot. The term disability can be literally defined as not having ability. How many of you out there that are amputees that have ability to move on with life? You have the ability to get up. You have the ability to do things, to get up, run, go back to work, garden, take care of your kids. So is disability a proper term? Is that something you want to be called? But we got to think about these things. Labeling has been historically a very serious matter, often bringing with it a plethora of differential and detrimental treatments of those that are being labeled. How do we as amputees educate these able-bodied people? How do we make a difference in changing the way we are labeled, the way things are said to us? How do we do that? The general public experiences relating to someone with a disability or limb loss may result from, guess what? Television. Where else are you going to get it from? TV, man. Movies, Hollywood. It's just like before when Skyscraper came out, and me, Dave, and Kathy, we were talking that. We were tabletopping that subject, and we were talking about why it's so important for Hollywood to portray amputees in the right light. Put an amputee in a movie portraying an amputee instead of an able-bodied person out there trying to pretend to be an amputee. Why was that relevant then? The same as why is it relevant now? Labels, expectations. This is why it's so important as an amputee, for me, as an amputee advocate, a patient advocate for amputees. It's my job to come up with some of these things to make you guys think, to make you sit back and go, what is this Sean man talking about? Because I want us to really have a good understanding of who we are, what we are, and what we can do. And yes, boys and girls, it is your responsibility to be ambassadors, to educate the able-bodied people on how to deal with amputees. And that is even so with other amputees who are new amputees. We need to bring them along. We need to swoop them up, man. Bring them along. Make sure they know what's going on. Make sure they know how to represent Amp Nation. The general public's experiences relating to people with disabilities, handicaps, limb loss are the result, and most of them know what they know from watching television, social media, or temporary contact with a person with a disability. We call those PWDs, a person with a disability. A negative attitude towards disability is one of the potential barriers for people with disabilities to achieve a social equality. Since few non-disabled people in our population interact directly with a person with some type of disability or limb loss, It is hard for them to understand what it is to live with this. It is hard for them to understand expectations and stereotypes that are laid upon us by these labels. It is hard for them to understand how far off base these things are. The realities of people who live with limb loss, disabilities on a daily basis. We are some amazing, outstanding individuals. Able-bodied people have no clue what we are capable of and what we can do. Prevailing attitudes not only determine the social expectations and treatment according to a person with some type of disability or limb loss in our society, but also his or her self-image and function. I was just speaking with a daughter and a mom today, and she had questions, and she's growing up, she's getting older. And one of the things that I talked with her about was, and I'll say this to you, I asked her, before we start going down this road of me counseling her and helping her with some of the topics that I'm sure are going to come up as I work with her, I asked her, I would like for you to stand and look at yourself in a mirror without your leg on. Let it happen. If you feel like you're going to cry, you feel like you're going to get sad, look at yourself. And once you get done, I want you to write down how you felt, what you thought. That's a good process. And I think that's a good process for you able-bodied people as you look at people with limb loss. Look at us. What do you think? We're more than what you see. And I think that's what people tend to forget. Labels have a way of sticking with us once they happen. And even when we think they're gone, we think we've shattered that glass ceiling, we think we've made a difference, we think we've proven a point, and we've showed them, they're still there. When we think we've shedded those labels from us for good, they have a way of showing that they're still there. Just like the outline of my wine glass, I can still see where that label was at. As a person with limb loss, they never really are gone. They never really go away. Many of us work for years to shed these labels that society puts on us, or others, family members, how they apply those to us, only to find out after all our hard work, that sticky residue is still there. It still remains in our psyche. What do we do to categorize people anyway? Why do we need to do that? Why do we need to? What is it about that? Aren't labels harmful and bad enough for most people that are able-bodied? Labeling is probably one of the most harmful, detrimental things that we can do to a human being, a fellow human being, with or without limb loss. Think of the difficulties caused over the years by assigning names, labels to certain ethnic groups or religions. The label in and of itself puts the person in a box. No matter what they do or say, they can't get out of that box. The label defines them. How many of us actually like to be labeled? I'm asking you, Amp Nation. You can leave your comments over here. Leave them on the show afterwards. How many of you like to be labeled? I see Brian, you're saying no video. Hopefully you're still seeing me. I'm still seeing that I'm on. I know Facebook has had some issues with fading in and out. Hopefully I'm still there. I'll give you a type here to let you know I'm still here. So hopefully you guys are still seeing me. If not, hopefully you're hearing my voice. So I just typed you a message that I'm still here, Brian. We do label and categorize people, but why do we need to categorize and label people? Labels are bad. They're hurtful, as you can tell from what I have put together just so far. We're still in segment 1. Labels, the things that they do to people. Being placed in a box is no fun. No fun at all. And no matter what you do or say, it's hard to get out of that box sometimes. Of course, let's get on to this before we end segment 1. There are positive labels and negative labels. I want to make sure that's clear. But even good ones have negative connotations. The real problem arises when people are unaware of the labels they often apply and don't even realize that the damage they're causing by using them. That is when labeling can be at its most harmful point. The process of labeling affects both the person doing the labeling, which is the labeler, and the person or persons labeled, the labeled. It's bad both ways. A quick break before we go into segment 2, preconceptions.
Sean Harrison.
Preconceptions. What does that mean? Segment 2, preconceptions, as we're talking about labels and expectations. So hopefully all of you are still getting video out there. I will try and drop some messages in here just to let you know I'm still on Facebook. I see some. Hey, and if you ever find that you can't hear me, you're not seeing me, just pop in a quick message and I'll try and see what's going on my end to make sure you are still, you still have me. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick hello, everyone, just to make sure you are still with me and you know I am still here. Still working with you guys. Okay, let's get into segment 2 of tonight's show, labels and expectations. Preconceptions. The American Psychological Association advocates that when referring to disability, it's best to put the person first. That is, instead of saying disabled person, choose person with a disability. The reasoning for this is to use the person first language in this construction of a sentence when you refer to a person or a disabled person. The same goes to an amputee, emphasizing a condition over the person who is affected by it, saying person with disability or individual with an amputation focuses attention on the person, not the condition. So preconceptions, what we're trying to get into and what we're going to talk about in this segment is, do you know me like that? Preconceptions. That's straight out of my book. Do you know me like that? And what that's talking about is this. There are many negative misconceptions and stereotypes about amputees or persons with limb loss. In today's society, Misconceptions and stereotypes lead to unfair generalizations of amputees, and they are developed for many different reasons. Unfortunately, some are self-inflicted. You heard me right. Unfortunately, some are self-inflicted. And you're probably wondering, what does he mean about that? Well, I'll tell you what I mean about that. In reality, most individuals living with limb loss are not what society portrays us to be like. Instead, these people are the exact opposite. Dave the One-Legged Spartan, Casey McAllister, Pat Longsdale, Muji Blade. I could go down the list. I know a lot of people. Kathy Sullivan, Shahali Ayers. I can just keep reeling them off. No Hand Bandit. So many amazing amputees out there are not what you expect. They're the opposite of what you expect. As you try to generalize them in this group, the generalization of a specific group of people, that's not only degrading, it's ignorant. We should never do these types of things to people. And I'm going to say, no matter what they're suffering from, it can cause a lot of tension within the group itself, outside the group. And there's many reasons that can happen. Society's judgment of others who are different has led to many problems when, in reality, most of what people believe is not true. The labels and expectations by a society of able-bodied people leads to ridiculous preconceptions by people misunderstanding what amputees are all about and who amputees are. You're so beautiful. Too bad you don't have an arm. This is an actual statement that was made to me. I had someone tell me this, I'm not going to say who, that a lady said this to a girl who was missing an arm. You're so beautiful, too bad you don't have an arm. I'm sorry, but I would have been like, what the H does that mean? Lady, what are you talking about? But unfortunately, that's people. That's what we're talking about tonight. So you're saying to me, she's so beautiful, but unfortunately, she doesn't have an arm that nobody's going to be attracted to her. Is that what I'm getting from that statement? You know, you've heard them. You've heard people say things. The terms, the labels, the expectations, the preconceptions, to label or not to label. All these things are what we're talking about tonight. Amputees face a broad range of social assumptions and biases. There is a stigma that people with disabilities, amputations, limb loss, are more likely to live in poverty, demonstrate lower levels of workforce participation, basically unemployed, and educational attainment. We're dumb. They may also, some of the preconceptions, they may also face violence and discriminations related to their disability and have difficulties assessing or accessing appropriate health care. In some regards, you might have some of that right with the, proper health care. Because I know for me, when I lost my limb, they kept telling me that I wasn't disabled. So trying to get the right health care was almost impossible. It was almost like the lady didn't understand what amputated limb meant. There's no other way to say it, guys. Labels suck. Nobody wants to be put into a box. I'm not one dimensional. I am not something simple. I am not, I'll just put it like this. I will not fit in a box. I'm 6'6". I ain't fitting in a box. It ain't happening. Don't try it. How would you describe yourself to someone? How would you guys describe yourself? You're listening to the show. When we think about labels and expectations, preconception, misassumptions, how would you describe yourself? Or better yet, what label have you been called? I bet you that hits one with you guys tonight. Feel free to post those. We'll talk about this much, much later. What labels have you been called? What terms have you heard whispered as you walk by? How did it make you feel? What was your feeling? I can't describe what I do or who I am without a painfully long run on and on and on sentence. There's just no way. I don't fit in a box. I do a lot of different things, and I won't, and I will not, and I refuse to cheapen or minimize or reduce who I am when I describe myself, just to make it easier for you to put me in the right human being. You're not going to box me up. And I say that to you, Amp Nation. Refuse to be put in a box. Refuse to be minimized. Refuse to not tell everything about your awesome self. You're not just a what is it for Twitter, 140 character person. You're more than that, man. Get out there. Let people know who we are, what we do, and how awesome we are. We need to break these terms and these labels and these unfair expectations. We're better than that. We're bigger than that. We're more than that. I want you guys to remember that. Segment 3 is titled Fear. Persons with disabilities are one of the most marginalized groups in the Western societies. These inequalities are manifested through various disadvantages in psychosocial, cultural, and economic domains. People who become an amputee as an adult go through an agonizing experience, a symbolic demonization and social exclusion after their former acceptance as a whole normal person is taken away in one surgery. This ongoing multifaceted process includes denial of their sexuality or sensuality, transgression of gender boundaries, and their construction as categorically different from the healthy people around them. Some amputees see themselves as unfit for society. After an amputation, this is how some people view themselves. People in society also see them as members of a stigmatized group. Fear. Why did we put fear in this topic tonight? Imagine that, the fear that people go through when they hear amputation or they come out of an amputation. Fear. The reason is that body image, not only provides a sense of self, our body image also affects how we think, how we act, how we relate to others. The way amputees see themselves contributes to the way society sees them. Fear, losing a part of yourself. How am I going to be seen? I don't want to be put in that box. The preconception of the stigma can sometimes lead to amputees being treated very differently by those who are non-amputees, because the latter may make assumptions on the basis of their limb loss, their disability, about all aspects of that individual's personality and functioning levels. Labeling is the recognition of social differences. It, in terms of the disability, the handicap experience for someone who's going through that, labeling occurs when others recognize that a certain biological trait is different from the normal in ways that society sees as very significant. Labeling could degenerate to seeing the amputated individual as a being or a person as a failure, their own fault. It can affect the person with an amputation by placing the stigma of being devalued. I'm not worth anything anymore. That is, they are treated in a way by individuals like they don't matter. Labels can be seen as a sign of personal failure. They're considered less valuable, not important, less than a human. This is why fear is part of this talk. Labeling and unfair expectations and preconceptions can create fear. I want to talk also about, in addition to what we're talking about, in addition to having to cope with all the stuff that we've talked about, in addition to having to cope with the physical limitations and the impact that these can have on an individual when we think about a social functioning individual, how society sees us, it can be devastating. Individuals have to adjust to the fact that they appear different from other people, different from everyone else in the room or at the party. Public attitude towards disability, rather than the existence of impairments alone, negatively affect feelings of well-being among individuals with limb loss, the disability, the handicap. Following an amputation, individuals must learn to adapt to change, to a change in their physical presence, their body image. They have to learn to adapt to social functioning, incorporating these changes into a new sense of self, a new sense of self-identity. besides stigmatization, segregation, and the labeling that will trouble the life of an individual with limb loss or some type of disability. People dealing with limb loss have to face their situation and can still go through feeling less self-worth or less self-worth. Even in the medical world, there is a lack, or we'll say there is a huge gap in the medical industry for peer counseling, mentors to amputees, helping them deal with limb loss. A huge gap. I am so busy with helping amputees because there's such a big gap that people just aren't thinking about. They don't understand the devastation of limb loss. And tonight, talking about this topic, labels and expectations, I really wanted to touch on something to where if you are an amputee or you work in the medical industry and you're hearing my voice in this show, this should be a wake-up call. Segment 4. Does it matter what we call them? I want to say that again. Segment 4 is titled, Does it matter what we call them? Them is we, us, amputees, people with disabilities. I want to quote Shakespeare. Yes, I'm quoting Shakespeare, people. You get it all on this show. Shakespeare said in Romeo and Juliet, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I want to say that again. Shakespeare said in Romeo and Juliet. How many of you have actually looked at the play Romeo and Juliet? Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. People who have studied semantics or psychology know that if a rose is called ragweed, it causes some people to sneeze. The label given to an object influences the way people react to the object. In similar fashions, the labels used to describe people can influence the way people react to them, especially if we do not know the people well. Does it matter what we call them? Yes, it matters. Many people with limb loss, amputees, do not accept the labels that are applied to them. I know I don't. So are you one of those people? Are we going to stand by, take that label? Are we going to live by that label? Are we going to let it affect us? Hey, buddy, love you, brother. Are we going to let it affect us? No. I want to say H no, but they'll put an adult rating on my show. So I can't say that. Heck no, we're not. So that quote from Shakespeare, and as you can see from a study that was done, being labeled affects us. It affects the people around us. It's no secret a lot of people in the world aren't comfortable around people with disabilities, limb loss, handicaps. It's no big secret. We know it. People come up to us all the time. Well, do you mind if I ask? They don't know how to handle themselves around us. But despite the fact that 1 in 5 people have some kind of disability or a limiting permanent physical condition, for those who can't refer to themselves as disabled yet, it can take time getting comfortable with the idea of being disabled, being an amputee, living with limb loss. It can take time. You really have to come to grips with a lot. Learning to understand why it's important what you refer to people as, the terms, the labels, the expectations, the preconceptions that you place on people. It's really important. It can take time getting comfortable with that idea of being an amputee. And it can take time, even longer, for people to get comfortable around us. Remember, we are ambassadors. We are here to also educate the able-bodied people how to live amongst us amputees. We must, in order for us all to get along. As a person with disabilities, interacting with the public can reveal a number of shocking social mores. We can cause immense stress to some people just by rolling into the room, walking into the room, crutching into the room. I'll never forget, we were in Laughlin, and it was me, Dave, Heather, and Casey. For those of you that don't know, Casey McAllister is my race partner. Dave Gannis is the captain of our Para-Spartan team. We were there at the first ever Para-Spartan in Laughlin, Nevada. We all decided we wanted to go get something to eat, and I'll never forget the uncomfortableness of people when Casey came in. Casey has no legs. He walks on his hands. You could see it in the room as it touched the room. As we waited in the lobby, and Casey was basically sitting on the ground, on his hands. How people didn't know how to be comfortable. Casey is an awesome guy. And for those of you that don't know who he is, look him up on Facebook, Casey McAllister. It's so true. People don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to act. They don't know how to interact with us in public sometimes. We can cause a lot of stress, a lot of discomfort when we walk into the room. We get into the room, pulling up at drive-thrus or asking for their help in a store. But it's never too late for people to change, all you able-bodied people. It's never too late to change, man. Losing a limb has been found to dramatically change a person's sense of body image and consequently self-image, which has in turn been associated with a person's satisfaction with life. A disability, a handicap, can dramatically affect a person's life. Then you come along and put labels and unfair expectations on the person. How do you expect people to deal? That is why this show is so important tonight. Are labels necessary when it comes to people with disabilities? Think about that. Ponder that thought. I know I've hit you guys with a lot of questions tonight. You got to do your homework, man. I'm going to quiz you guys on the next show. But are labels necessary when it comes to people with disabilities? Something to think about. Well, the government seems to think so. You know how the government works. I, for one, have had trouble with going to get a handicap placard for my car for parking. I'm being very honest and real with you guys, sharing a moment. I've had trouble with that, and I still do. Do I park in handicap parking? Yes, sometimes. Even without the placard, you're right. And I have had some people come up to my car and stare at me and give me dirty looks. And of course, I open my door and throw my foot out. I'm like, "You got a problem?" And they walk off. They don't want to deal with that. So, but I've had a problem with that. The handicap placard, getting one. Most people using handicap parking, the thing about it is most people that are using that are able-bodied people. That's a whole nother show when we start talking about people that have the placards. I don't even want to get into that. We all have seen that one person getting out of the car and you're looking at him like, what's wrong with you, man? It's a whole nother show. But for me personally, my reasons for not wanting to get one of those is very simple. I struggle with being labeled, and especially displaying it on a symbol, a label, right on the front of my car, hanging from my windshield. And unfortunately, it's abused by so many able-bodied people. I honestly think the disabled or handicapped symbol is one of the worst labels because it has lost what it was meant for. That's why I struggle with going to get one. The use of such labels may also inadvertently make people lower their expectations of an amputee. Labels focus on what amputees cannot do, not what they can do. And I think this can be discouraging for a lot of people, amputees. Making the amputee feel incomplete or inadequate, which can contribute to the development of low self-esteem. One of the girls that I did the interview with, she rock climbs. And she was telling me when she's at her place and she's doing that, she's warming up. I guess they do a warm up, climbing up on the rocks. And as she's doing her warm up, getting ready to actually work out and climb, she tells me when she's doing her warm up, people are clapping and applauding. And she's looking at them like, what are you doing? I'm just warm. I haven't even done anything. I'm just warming up. The unfair, unrealistic expectations that people put on people, labels. Avoid the "you're so inspirational" remarks. Sometimes that doesn't go over so well. I know I get them a lot. I think I've learned to deal with those a lot more than the average amputee or person dealing with limb loss. People with disabilities as a whole don't like being referred to as inspirational. There's a very select group of us out there that are probably okay with that. But on the whole, most people with limb loss or disabilities, that's probably not going to go over so well like you think it is, especially when they are doing the most basic tasks, like, I don't know, going to buy some milk. You're so inspirational. And this happens all the time. So be very careful with that. While some people get inspired by us simply getting up and doing our daily living activities, it can be not taken so positive by the average amputee. So please try to refrain from sharing your thoughts with people with limb loss or disabilities when you see them just doing normal daily activities. They're just living. That's all they're trying to do. That's just a little tip as we talk about labeling. Some of us with limb loss don't like the patronizing, avoiding remarks such as, good for you, you're so brave, wow, I'm so impressed. Labels, expectations, preconceptions, misconceptions, these may not come across so well as we talk about this topic. So does it really matter what we call them? I asked you. Amp Nation. Does it really matter? Labeling or labels are inherently a general, how can we say, failure, a bad thing. It really, how can I say, robs a person of their unique strengths and qualifications and qualities. Each person is different living with limb loss. Knowing the downsides of labeling can help you able-bodied people understand and relate to a person living with limb loss or a disability, or even as an amputee. You, as non-amputees, play an important role in helping to ensure that negative expectations do not come from you about those living with disabilities, handicaps, or limb loss. Keep in mind, everyone, I've used several terms tonight. You know this is an amputee show. But people with disabilities, I'm not trying to speak for everyone, but people with limb loss, I think, is what I'm focusing the most on, as this is Amp Life Talk Radio and is a show for amputees. So I don't want people to get offended when I use those terms and think I'm speaking for all disabled people in one group. Remember, I'm not putting you all in a box. So every group is different. So if you go and find another show that deals with all the other disabilities, right, they're covering it there. So I just want to get that out there so nobody gets mad at me, comes back at me later on. In conclusion, as we come to a close, things we need to keep in mind. Negative preconceptions can lead to a lack of opportunities and work, low self-esteem, isolation, and consequently stigmatization of or stigmatization, marginalizing people. What else we want to say? Reoccurring negative health outcomes. Negative misconceptions can lead to so many things that are bad. Stigmatizing people, marginalizing people, the reoccurring of negative health outcomes, low self-esteem, lack of opportunity. So what I'm trying to say is this: when we do this, people are affected. Job, income, what they can really do, health-wise, getting coverage, being put into a box, the prolonged discomfort of people with some type of disability. These create such a substantial social burden on the individual that's being labeled. We need to be aware of what we're doing. Hope that wasn't too confusing for you guys. Persons with disabilities frequently find they do have limited opportunities, especially in employment. People with disabilities, keep in mind when I say disabilities, I'm talking about limb loss. Social rejection, discrimination in employment practices. I'm tall. Agricultural barriers. I'm 6'6", and I have limb loss. I get the double whammy when it comes to this. Always bumping my head and things just aren't made the way I would like them to be made, with a prosthetic foot walking up and down different things. Inaccessibility, especially for you above the knee or bilateral amputees, people missing upper extremities. Attitudes are significant in the change. We need to address these issues. We need to really think about them. Us as amputees, and those of you as able-bodied people. Really think about these things. In conclusion, labeling is the assignment of a descriptor to an individual based on selected behavioral and physical characteristics. In society, an assigned label essentially places the individual into a specific group, that box, possessing similar characteristics. By design, a label can serve as, how can I say, a reason for discriminatory purposes of distinguishing the individual or individuals from the rest of society, providing information about them regardless of how true it is, the preconceptions, the misconceptions. Individuals with amputation have a particular vulnerability to developing depression. Amputation affects the physical, psychological, social aspects of every individual's life, as well as the lives of their family members. Preconception, the stigma of a person with limb loss, problems with amputees. These things can lead to being treated very differently than non-amputees. We need to be very careful how we choose our words. Another way labeling can harm amputees is through the way they may come to define artificially or define and artificially limit the way amputees come to think of themselves and the way others think of them. Interacting with people with disabilities or limb loss is only as hard as you make it. That also goes for the amputee. I want to wrap this show up by saying thank you for listening to another episode of Amp Life Talk Radio. I appreciate each and every one of you. I want you to know that. I hope that this show did something for you, touched you, made you think. Share it with friends, families, co-workers. I hope this show is something that all of us are getting something from. I get something from it because I get to listen to all your comments or read your comments. And some of you actually do get in touch with me and talk with me. I'm finding that more and more people are reaching out to me via email and messenger to do talks with them. I'm so thankful. I'm so blessed. I want to thank you all for listening to another episode of Amp Life Talk Radio, a show for amputees and those affected by limb loss. Amp Life Talk Radio. Please leave me comments over on Facebook, suggestions, criticisms, whatever you may want to put on the Facebook page at Amp Life Talk Radio on Facebook. I appreciate all of those. You can also check out Instagram page. I post pictures over there. As you can see, I got some new shoes and they have a heel on them, and I'm learning to walk with a heel on. Much more to come over on all of our social media platforms. Check us out, Amp Life COM. That's the handle for Instagram and Twitter. Also, the new Blog Talk Radio site, which is coming. I am going to be setting up another day that I'll be doing an extra show. It will be on Blog Talk Radio. It's a call-in show. What that means is all of you can actually now call in and talk on the radio. I'm trying to get that, the final processes worked out for that. Do go over, check it out. I'm going to post something right now for that. Do go over, check it out, save everything, go check out the site. But coming up soon, I would like to get some of your suggestions on what day you would like to see that show, what time, and day. You want an evening show, which works out better for me. I don't think any of you are going to be up in the morning when I'm up, but leave me some comments on that and some feedback so I can get that up and going. Hopefully by next month, we will have the call-in show over on Blog Talk Radio, where I will put out the phone number. I think I've posted it in a few sites, but you can actually call in and be a part of the show instead of just listening to me. I can have you, my callers, my listeners, come in and talk about things that are important to you, ask questions. It's your show. That show is going to be a show that I may have a show topic, but for the most part, it's going to be you calling in and doing all the talking. So I'm trying to make this a very pleasurable experience for all of us involved, especially you, my listener. I want to make sure you feel like you're a part of this show, because without you, there would be no me. So I'm very thankful. Thanks, guys, for listening to another episode of Amp Life Talk Radio. You guys have an amazing, wonderful night.
You are listening to Sean Harrison on Amp Life Talk Radio, a place for amputees and those dealing with limb loss. The views expressed on the show by the host, co-hosts, and guests are their own. Always seek medical advice from a licensed medical professional.